Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Um, okay, so the last video we did a Midshipman's Hope review, um, and it occurred to me I've only actually done reviews so far. I wanted to do something different, so you can't see it, but I've got 21 books lying on the bed here next to me. So um, this is 5 of my favorite book series. Believe it or not, this was actually a lot harder to kind of pick and choose in terms of which order, which book series to choose and um, um, which spot they should go in. So instead of doing the usual top 5 book series thing, I am going to do that kind of ranking video later in the year. I believe it's a top 5 fantasy novels. That's supposed to come out later this year. But for now, I just thought it would be fun to pull out 5 of my favorite book series and just see what happens. I'm not going to go the usual top 5 route and start at number 5 and work my way through to number 1. I'm just going to go, pick up a book series at random and, yeah. So, let's get started. Alright, so the first book series that I want to cover is actually, I think, the biggest series in the set, at least in terms of individual books. This is Anthony Horowitz's Stormbreaker series, or rather Alex Rider series, sorry. I got the first book, Stormbreaker, in, I think it was the summer of 2008 or 2009. I got it for Christmas from my aunt, and yeah, really cool book. It's definitely aimed, the whole series is definitely aimed at a younger, sort of teenaged demographic. But I really enjoyed it. I actually thoroughly enjoyed that book. And the movie came out a short while after I got the book. Or rather, it came on television a short while after I got the book. And I don't think it had just been released. Let me just see if I can find the thing. Book of Books. This edition published in 2006. So, the book was already quite old when I'd gotten it. The movie, I think, hit cinemas about the same time, 2006, 2007-ish. So I got this, and when the movie came on TV one day, sat down and went and watched it, and to be honest, I hated it. Because they had taken a book that was, not even 300 pages. I think this is like 237, 38 pages. And, the plot is really simplistic, but they took the simplistic plot of this book, and in some places, sorry guys, bit of an itchy nose there. But they took a really simple plot and then they just dumbed it down further. Anyway, I enjoyed Stormbreaker enough that a couple of months later, I went and I picked up the second book, Point Blank, and I picked this one up in a stationery shop, not a bookshop, a stationery shop, in, I believe, 2010. And enjoyed that one enough. Unfortunately, I could not find the rest of the books at that time. And then at the end of that year, I worked at a flea market, made a substantial amount of money doing it, enough that I could actually pick up Skeleton Key, Eagle Strike, Scorpia, and Archangel, which were the other 4 books in the series, which at that time only had 6 books, right? Of the 6, Scorpia, which is the 5th book, is by far my favorite. I feel like Scorpia is probably the darkest one. The villains in Scorpia are certainly the most intimidating. And then, I believe it was in 2011, early 2011, I found I was trying to find, I don't know why, I'm kind of fascinated to see when these things were first published in 2007. Okay, so this one apparently came out a short while after in 2007. When did Archangel come out? First published 2005. Okay, so Snakehead arrived. I found Snakehead in, I believe, early 2011-ish. And at that time, I hadn't actually read Alex Rider for a while. So when I picked this up, I saw it and I thought, nah, there's no way. I bought this at a bookshop in Pretoria. I suppose that doesn't really mean much to any international viewers, but I found this in a bookshop for like $130. It's still got the price tag on the back. $130 for a book that's a little under 400 pages, about 3 pages shy of 400 pages. This is by far the most violent of the books. Not really the best one, in my opinion. The villain seems a little bit cookie cutter, in my opinion. Although I suppose you could say the same thing about all of these books. Still, I mean, it's a lot of fun. And that's the first book series that I thought I'd cover in this video. So, let's look at the next one. Alright, so the second series is this one. Let's take this one. It's a little easier to hold on to. This is the Star Wars Dark Nest trilogy. About the same time that I picked up the other Alex Rider novels, books 3 through 6 of the Alex Rider series, I picked up Joiner King a little while before that. This is the first book, and I saw this. I think I must have paid about $200 for this. It's funny because I went to Pretoria for the flea market, and I had, I think, 1 book that I took with me. One like really big, thick book. And I came home with, I think, close to a dozen books, in addition to the one that I'd taken over with me initially. But I saw this and thought, wow, that's creepy. I mean, you've got Han Solo on the cover, backed by these massive bugs. And I looked at that and thought, are they making more of these? Because I didn't know that there was at the time I had no idea that they had a whole, I mean, I knew they had novels, but I thought the novels had kind of ended. So I was pleasantly surprised when I saw this, and I showed it to my cousin, because he came over to visit the one day. I was staying with my grandmother, and he came over to visit. I showed him this book, and his reaction was, "Are they going to make more movies?" Because at this point, I mean, we just had the prequels. We only had the original trilogy and the prequels, so yeah. And I did actually suggest to a friend of mine, because he was doing a Star Wars fan film at one point, and I did kind of suggest to him, hey, why don't you take the Dark Nest trilogy, and or at least the first book, and try and adapt that, because then it's a fan film, but it's also kind of an original thing. Now, I mean, I can only imagine the kind of difficulties that you would have had to put a film like this, like that together, even a fan film, and base it off of the Joiner King. I can only imagine the amount of difficulty. I picked up the second book, The Unseen Queen, and this one you've got Leia holding a lightsaber, and now that was what really caught my eye. The first book, it was the bugs, and then the second book's got Leia carrying a lightsaber with these really creepy looking bugs that look nothing like the bugs on the first book's cover. I really liked it. It was fun and interesting, and yeah. So I bought that as well, about 2 or 3 months after I bought the Joiner King. And then I had to wait, because I couldn't find the third book. It took me, the third book, The Swarm War, took me about 2 or 3 years to get a copy of this. I could not find this book anywhere. I went to every bookstore in the Gauteng region. I went to every exclusive books, every bargain books, every bookshop that I could find to look for this book, and I found nothing. And eventually I went through to the exclusive books, the bookshop where I'd gotten the first 2 books in the series, thinking, okay, well, surely they must have it by now. And they didn't. So when I asked them about it, they said, oh, well, we don't have it in stock, but we can order it for you. And I thought, well, because I live about 2 hours away from there, so but we placed the order. We arranged for my grandmother to come and pick it up, and a little while later she came over to visit. It was for my birthday at one point, or for something. I kind of forget what it was, but she sort of dropped the book on the counter and said, right, oh, by the way, here's your book. I really enjoyed these books. In fact, after I got the third book, I subsequently went back and I reread this trilogy cover to cover. Now, if I'm to believe the timeline, that they include this nifty little timeline in the front of the book. I don't know how clearly you guys can see this, but they have this neat little timeline that documents everything before, during, and after the between, like, the Clone Wars, and before the Clone Wars, during the Clone Wars, the original trilogy, what happened afterwards. Then they've got the New Jedi Order series, and then the Dark Nest trilogy. And the Dark Nest trilogy is apparently, according to this timeline at least, the end of the extended universe. I happen to know that that's not the case because I found a book series called Legacy of the Force, and I'm not sure, but I think Mara Jade dies pretty early on in that book series, and that was enough reason for me not to go and read it because Mara Jade was by far one of my favorite characters in this trilogy. So, yeah. Anyway, that's my second choice for this video. Let's take a look at the third one. Alright, the third series that I thought I'd include is, once again, more a YA series. I picked this up at a bookshop, and this is L.J. Smith's Nightworld Nightworld series. Now, L.J. Smith, that name, I'd seen it. I'd never read any of her stuff. Oh no, that's not exactly true. I'd actually read the first 4 books in the Vampire Diaries novels, because this is the same author that wrote that book series. I saw the first one, the first volume. This is Nightworld Volume 1. It's got the first 3 books, Secret Vampire, Daughters of Darkness, and the third one's called Enchantress. I'm actually surprised that this book series has not made it to television, because I think this would be really cool. Let me see here. The Nightworld is a secret society of vampires, werewolves, witches, and creatures of darkness, a place too dangerous to fall in love. That's the sort of tagline of this book, and you'll find the same tagline repeated on each of the other 3 or each of the other 2 volumes. Okay. So I picked up the third one, or the first one rather, and on the same day that I picked up the first one, we were in that bookshop. I found 3 of these anthologies. So I bought books 1 through 3, and then I saw we had volume 2, which is books 4 to 6, Dark Angel, The Chosen, and Soulmate. And then I also saw they had volume 3, and this is books 7 through 9 of the series. And there is apparently a 10th novel out there. I have not been able to find this book. What initially caught my eye was the cover art. Okay, you've got the series name, you've got the list of the books, the author's name, and then you've got a girl on the front cover kind of staring at you. Almost like an actor or an actress staring into a film camera, kind of breaking the fourth wall. This is a YA series that is incredibly dark. If I had to sort of venture a guess, I'd say it's actually darker than the Vampire Diaries. Although I suppose that doesn't really take much effort to be darker than that series. Maybe I'm wrong. I've probably triggered a couple of Vampire Diaries fans. But like I said, this book series would be fantastic for television. I mean, you've got all these rules and regulations, and each race, each like vampires and werewolves and witches, every sort of inhabitant of the Nightworld has a flower as an insignia. So if I remember correctly, the wolfbane flower is for werewolves. I think it's foxglove for vampires. So they've all got like a ring with a flower, with like a black flower emblazoned on it, and each flower is different to represent the different, races or species or whatever you want to call them. doesn't really matter what you call them. This is a fantastic series, just in general, and it's an urban fantasy series that, I mean, it's aimed at teenagers, but this is a series that even adults, I feel, could enjoy. So, the romance sort of comes out of nowhere, and there's kind of a couple of like more ridiculous aspects, but it's a fun series to read, and yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a pity that I can't find the 10th book, because that was supposed to be the conclusion, I think. I just want to see if I can find this thing. Witchlight. So there's no actual like hint as to whether or not there is a 10th. I've heard that there was a 10th book. I have not been able to find it. Maybe I'm not looking in the right places. Anyway, good series. I hope to see it make it to television one day. Maybe Netflix can do a series on it. I don't know. I mean, the Vampire Diaries and the originals are available on Netflix. So, you know, where's Night World? Guys, come on! But yeah, it's definitely a good series. I highly recommend it. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3 down. 3 down, 2 to go. So what's next? Okay, so next up we have the Scarecrow series by Matthew Reilly. This one's got a bit of an interesting history for me, because I got the 3rd book, Scarecrow, for Christmas, I believe, and I couldn't read it because I couldn't make sense of it. And I then picked up, I got Area 7 and Ice Station as well. Ice Station I actually picked up. Ice Station is the 1st book in the series, and I'd actually read this before on vacation. I borrowed a copy from the local library. I was going away for about a week or 2 weeks or something like that, and I needed a book to read, so I took a copy out of the library, took it on vacation with me, and really enjoyed it. Reilly puts a ridiculous amount of detail into this book. He talks about all the different like military forces. So you got the French, you got the SAS, you've got the Marines. I think the tagline here is Schofield's men are tough. Okay, so the end of the blurb says that the unit will follow their leader into hell, right? And then the tagline is, they soon discover that they just did. Now there are 5 books, 4 novels, and 1 novella short story thing and that's called Hell Island. If you haven't read it, read it. Like, seriously, if you're a fan of military thrillers, you need to read this series. I'm not even kidding. You really have to read this series. But I picked up Ice Station, and then a couple of months later, I think this was actually something from my dad. My dad picked up Area 7, and yeah, I kind of picked it up and read it, and kind of made its way into my book collection. Loads of fun, but I mean the whole series is really violent. So I read the first 3, and then I got the 4th one for Christmas a few years ago, and Okay, this one's a bit more sci-fi-esque. It's a little bit more out there than some of the other plots. I mean, in Ice Station, something unusual is found in Antarctica, and essentially all hell breaks loose because everybody thinks that this is some sort of extraterrestrial ship, and everybody wants to get it to get the technology. So you've got the SAS, you've got French Spec Ops, you've got French, British. I don't think the Russian teams are in here. But there are a couple of other countries that are interested in this thing. So they all send a unit out, and essentially everybody starts killing each other. Area 7 deals with an escaped sort of convict who takes over a secret military base during the presidential visit. The United States president is visiting this base to see that it's decommissioned or something to that effect. Scarecrow, the hero of the previous two novels, finds himself subject to a bounty hunt, and this was probably one of the most violent books I've ever read. This was a damn good book. This whole series is just good. Scarecrow was good. This was, of all the books in the series, I would say Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves is probably the most violent. Up until I read Army of Thieves, Scarecrow was the most violent book in the series. There is a scene. If you don't believe me, listen to this. There is a scene in this book where a character has a box. He's restrained, he's got a box put over his head, and rats are dropped into the box. These rats literally eat this guy's face. He dies like this. This is how he is killed. Rats literally eat this guy's face. And I mean, you get extremely gory details when they pull the box off. There's like a whole description of what the guy's face looks like. The plot follows a sort of secret Soviet Russian weapon on a secret base that is activated, and this thing is essentially a doomsday weapon. It's going to set the atmosphere on fire. It's going to basically wipe out anything and everything it comes into contact with. A bit more out there than the other three plots. The other three are somewhat realistic. I'm not sure how realistic this plot is, but it's a good book, and that's reason enough for me to read it. Probably my favorite book in the series. So, that's 4 series, and there is one more series that I want to cover. So, let's get to it. So, for the final series in this 5 favorite series list, I thought I'd cover a different. I think it's time we kind of break away. We've looked at a series where vampires and werewolves, live among us. We've looked at teenage spies. We've been to a galaxy far, far away. And we've looked at a military thriller series. I thought we'd mix it up a little bit by throwing in a fantasy series this time. The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. I got Eragon from my uncle I think it was just before the film came out. The film went into production, and a short while before it was released, my uncle came back from America, and basically, I think it was like a Christmas present or something like that. As you can probably tell, the cover is all battered and messed up. I've read this book so many times, which is why the cover is bent and all like messed up. The most amazing part about Eragon for me is the fact that the author, Christopher Paolini, actually wrote this when he was 15 years old. I mean, he was apparently either still in high school or just finishing high school. I'm not quite sure how that works. Now, I did actually pick up the DVD, the film. I picked that up on DVD. I saw a PG rating on the back of it, and there's some particularly gory scenes in this. When I got this book, I read it cover to cover in the course of essentially a day, and this thing's like, I think it's about 500 pages or so. There's a bit of like a prelude or a preview of the second book as well. I liked this book, I really did, and I subsequently lent this book to my dad, and he read it, and he loved it, and I've actually loaned this book to both of my sisters, and they've both loved it, from what I can tell. When I watched the film, I saw the PG rating on the back, and I actually called my mom and said, listen, this is the situation, because in our family, we take age restrictions and age ratings very, very seriously. So if it says PG-13, unless your parents say otherwise, you have to be 13 to watch it. It's that simple. And I mean, there are like 2 or 3 really gory sequences. Eragon and Brom, his, I guess, mentor character, they're riding through a town at one point. They find all the inhabitants have been killed and piled up in the middle of the town with a baby impaled right at the top. There's a baby impaled on a spear, and you get really gruesome, gory descriptions of this. And there's also a description of a scene where a character gets shot right here, straight between the eyes, takes an arrow. I called my mom, and I had the book on me, so I just finished reading it a third time. And I said, listen, this is the situation. Here's this film. Here's the age rating. I don't know about this because of these sequences. And I actually described each one basically directly out of the book. And my mom actually sort of thought, well, yeah, but you have to understand that, she basically said, well, if it's PG, then maybe they cut those scenes out. And I sort of went, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. So myself and my youngest sister, who I think was about 10 or 11 at the time, about sort of 10, 11, 12, 13-ish, we sat and watched it. And I have to admit, I'm actually kind of disappointed that they removed those scenes. I mean, the scene where the character gets shot between the eyes is still in the film, but he takes the arrow to his forehead instead, which, I mean, it's kind of the same scene, it's just going in a different place, and I would argue that getting shot in the forehead isn't actually that much better than getting shot between the eyes. Although I suppose you could also make the argument that the arrow still went between his eyes because it smacked him right in the middle of the forehead. But I thought it was kind of odd. By far my favorite character in this whole series is actually the herbalist, Angela. just this really eccentric character who's trying to prove that toads don't exist, that they're actually frogs. And I mean, it kind of makes sense. I got Eldest, the second book, a little while later. That was just like a random gift. I mentioned to my grandmother that I was looking for this book, and a couple of months later, I was out there visiting her, and she basically dropped the book in my lap and said, "Oh, by the way, are you still looking for that book?" Yeah, kind of. She handed me this book and said, "Well, there you go." It's kind of a Swarm War story all over again. That same year, Brissinger, I think it was the same year, or maybe it was the year after. I'm not quite sure when this was printed. 2008, so I think it was a few months to a year after I got Eldest, that I got Brissinger for Christmas. And of all the books, I think Brissinger is probably my favorite in the whole series. I loved the details that went into the dwarvish culture and the culture of the elves, and the Dragon Rider history is fascinating in this book. I mean, you had to wait a while for Brissinger, but it was well worth the wait. I mean, my dad and my sisters read the books, read Brissinger as well, just after I read it. They've actually read the whole series. I think with the exception of Inheritance, my sisters have actually read all of the books. Inheritance probably has what I think maybe the best cover in the series. Just me. I kind of like the angle that the dragon is sort of staring at you. The golden dragon, Glader, on the front here, is old. Okay, so having a profile shot of him kind of makes sense, because you're looking at this really old character, and you're looking at a profile of him. He's not meant to look at you straight on. And even this, I forget this one's name. Wow, that's embarrassing. I have to admit, this one's actually got a bit of an interesting story as well. I picked this book up at a bookshop, much like most of these other books. Picked this one up in a bookshop, and funny thing is, I'd been waiting for this book for several months at the time, and the day we arrived, back in 2011, I think, we arrived as they were unpacking this book. Like, I'm not even kidding. We got there, and they had just unpacked a shipment of copies of Inheritance. And I immediately snagged a copy, because I'd been waiting for this book for months, and I wanted to know how the story ended. And so I immediately snagged a copy, and I'm glad I did, because by the time we were done in that bookshop, there was not a copy left. They had unpacked and repacked the display table where all these copies were set up. We were leaving that shop, myself and my grandparents, and somebody picked up the absolute last copy of this book and headed for the cashier. So I'm kind of proud of this particular book. So yeah. Anyway, that's my 5 books, my 5 favorite book series. Feel free to let me know what your favorites are. Did I include your favorites? Yes or no? If not, what are your 5 favorites? If you had to make a top 5, what would be in your top 5? You can drop all that in the comment section below. I am going to do more book-related top 10s and top 5 lists and things like that at some point, but I need to recharge my batteries after this one. So, thank you guys for watching, and yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. So, yeah, I think I'm just repeating myself at this point. I think I'm gonna go to bed now. So, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you again next time. Cheers, and keep reading.